Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, host of Kinda Murdery, a podcast that's about more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories. The unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. That's right, my friends, you heard correctly, just like it says in the intro. I am Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. Thank you so much for deciding to spend your precious time with me. You know, in 1939, playwright Joseph Kesselring wrote a black comedy, a dark comedy that is, about a little old lady who poisoned her boarders with arsenic so she could collect their pensions. That play was forever immortalized in pop culture by the 1944 Frank Capra film starring Cary Grant of the same name, also called Arsenic and Old Lace. If you're familiar with Frank Capra, it's probably for his legendary Jimmy Stewart film It's a Wonderful Life. So Arsenic and Old Lace, of course, was a little bit of a different artistic path for Capra to walk down. However, as you're about to find out, seemingly harmless ladies committing murder with arsenic is hardly the sole purview of the imaginary worlds created by playwrights and movie directors. It happens in the real world, the true crime world, too. Today, I bring you a modern, all-too-real update of that classic modus operandi, and I ask you to please join me as we uncover what truths we can and solve what mysteries we may. Kinda Murderies, Arsenic, and New Lace. The harrowing tale of Black Widow Blanche starts now. In the heart of North Carolina, during the tumultuous times of the early 1930s, a girl named Blanche Kaiser was born into a world that was far from ordinary. She was one of 7 children in a family where stability was fleeting as the wind. Her father, Parker Davis Kaiser Sr., was a man of many faces and even more jobs. He was perhaps the living embodiment of the old label jack of all trades and master of none. Among his self-assigned roles, he was an evangelical preacher, albeit without formal recognition. He had no papers to be a preacher, revealed Jay Ashley, a former reporter with the Alamance News. Parker's approach to religion was unorthodox to say the least. He would spontaneously begin preaching, his sermons echoing in the streets, irrespective of an audience. Like James Dean Bradfield, frontman for the legendary Welsh rock band, Parker Davis Kaiser Sr. was a manic street preacher. Despite his public persona as a devout man, Parker's personal life was marred by controversy and contradiction. Ultimately, he would tear the Kaiser family apart when he abandoned his wife, Blanche's mother, for a younger woman. His penchant for alcohol and his stern demeanor had weighed heavily on the family, long before he left. Blanche, growing up in this turbulent environment, was no stranger to hardship. The family's instability and her father's alcoholism, abuse, and abandonment left, as one might expect, a profound impact on young Blanche. As soon as the opportunity arose, she seized it, leaving her troubled home behind. And that decision marked the beginning of a journey that would lead her down a path far removed from the chaos of her early life. But as is often the case, sadly, in stories shrouded with mystery and violence, and really, as is certainly the case for all of us, one's past is never truly left behind. The year was 1952, and Blanche Kaiser, at the youthful age of 19, was embarking on a new chapter of her life. She married James Napoleon Taylor, a man who had just returned from the ravages of the Korean War. Taylor worked as a furniture restorer, a profession that required patience and precision, yet, ironically, he was known for his short temper. In stark contrast to his weekdays, Taylor reserved Sundays for a devout ritual. He meticulously edited taped recordings of sermons from the Glen Hope Baptist Church. These tapes were not for his personal reflection, but were sent across seas for missionary work, spreading the church's message far and wide. Meanwhile, Blanche carved out her own place in the world. She found employment at a Kroger supermarket in Burlington, North Carolina. Her dedication and hard work paid off, and she climbed the ranks to become the head cashier, a position of considerable esteem, especially for a woman in that era. For an impressive 32 years, Blanche remained a constant figure at Kroger. She was more than just an employee, she was a familiar face, a friend to many who walked through the store's doors. Customers would often find themselves gravitating toward her checkout line not just to purchase their groceries, but to share a moment of their day with Blanche. She was always pleasant and outgoing to customers, remembered Brenda Green, a former colleague at Kroger. Notice the emphasis on customers there. Blanche Kaiser and James Taylor were united in marriage for 21 years and had 2 daughters together. Yet amidst these milestones, the shadow of loss was never far behind. In 1966, Blanche's father passed away. His death at the age of 62 was attributed to heart disease. Then, in 1973, 7 years following her father's death, tragedy struck again, when Blanche discovered her husband, James Taylor, lifeless in their bed. At just 45 years old, he was pronounced dead, and once again a heart attack was cited as the cause. The specter of heart disease seemed to loom over the men in Blanche's life, casting a pall of mystery and unanswered questions. These successive losses, shrouded in the commonality of their cause, painted a picture of a woman acquainted with grief far beyond the ordinary. As our story unfolds, the circumstances surrounding these deaths beg a closer look, hinting at a deeper and perhaps darker narrative playing out beneath the surface of Blanche Taylor's seemingly ordinary existence. In the wake of her husband's untimely death, Blanche at 40 found herself navigating life as a widow, but solitude was not her destiny. Blanche, with her striking looks, keen intelligence, and impeccable sense of style, soon caught the eye of Raymond C. Reed, a divorced manager at the very Kroger store where she held the position of head cashier. Their budding relationship brought a semblance of normalcy to Blanche's life. Mom never expected to spend the rest of her life by herself. She had too much to offer, her daughter Cynthia Chapman reflected. Cynthia's sister Vanessa Woods shared a similar sentiment about Reed. He was a very good man, she said. He was good to us. However, Blanche's long-standing employment at Kroger was not without its complications. Despite her popularity among customers, her relationships with some colleagues were strained. Although Kroger acknowledged her skills, lauding her as a good leader and utilizing her expertise to train new checkers, not everyone viewed her in the same positive light. A co-worker who preferred anonymity revealed, "If you got on her bad side, she could be vindictive." Another colleague bluntly stated, "Everyone thought she was two-faced. She could be underhanded." But the most troubling aspect of her work life involved Robert J. Hutton, a top company official. Blanche Taylor alleged that Hutton had been making unwanted advances and inappropriately touching female clerks for a long time. The situation escalated in an encounter in October of 1985. According to Mrs. Taylor, Hutton, partially undressed, confronted her in a conference room. "You ready for this?" he reportedly said after grabbing her from behind. In a desperate move, Blanche grabbed his pants and underwear and escaped from the store, leaving Hutton to cover himself with a meat cutter's smock. This incident marked the end of Blanche Taylor's tenure at Kroger. She never returned to her job after that day. 3 months later, she filed a sexual harassment lawsuit, and understandably described the entire experience as debilitating. Blanche Taylor, in the eyes of many, epitomized the image of a sweet Christian lady. Her involvement with the church was not just a duty, but a heartfelt commitment. She actively participated in her church community, often volunteering to bring food to those who were ill. Mom would have been one of those women who would have made a great pastor's wife, her daughter Cindy Chapman shared. Blanche's deep knowledge of Scripture further accentuated her devout persona, and her lifelong spiritual journey led her to a pivotal moment on Easter Sunday, 1985. A relative introduced her to the Carolina United Church of Christ, a serene place of worship nestled near the textile mills on the Ha River outside of Burlington. It was here that she met Reverend Dwight W. Moore, a man of her age who, like her, had experienced the trials of divorce and was raising 2 grown children. Blanche and Reverend Moore's connection was immediate. Moore, taking a keen interest in her, began reaching out, telephoning and leaving notes at her door when she was unavailable. It wasn't long before their friendship blossomed into something more, starting innocently with an ice cream cone and progressing to accompanying each other to church events. At this juncture, Blanche's daughters believed her relationship with Raymond C. Reed, the former Kroger manager, had begun to wane. However, Nola Halbrook, Reverend Moore's sister, suggested a more complex scenario. She believed that, unbeknownst to Reverend Moore, Blanche was simultaneously seeing both men. And here we begin to add another layer of intrigue to Blanche Taylor's life, hinting at a tangled web of relationships and secrets that extended beyond her public image as a devout and caring church member. The darkness begins to spread with the sudden illness of Raymond Reed. His admission to the hospital for severe and inexplicable nausea and vomiting marked the beginning of a mysterious and troubling chapter. Throughout Raymond's prolonged hospitalization, Blanche remained a constant presence by his side. She would do the nice thing and bring his favorite dish or a milkshake, recounted Raymond's son Steve. Her visits were marked by gestures of kindness, such as bringing him homemade banana pudding, which she lovingly spoon-fed to him. This particular scene, observed by nurses on October 1, 1986, would later gain significance in our unfolding story. Tragically, just 1 week after Blanche spoon-fed him the banana pudding, Raymond Reed passed away. His death was initially attributed to complications from Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare and severe autoimmune disorder. The diagnosis, as explained by the Mayo Clinic, involves the immune system attacking the nerves, leading to symptoms like weakness, numbness, and potentially fatal cardiac arrest. Despite the complexity of his condition, the randomness of his symptoms raised unanswered questions. In the wake of Raymond's death, Blanche played a crucial role in the decisions regarding his remains. She persuaded his family against an autopsy, arguing, as relayed by his son Steve, "Your dad's been cut up enough. He wouldn't want this." Her influence extended beyond his medical care to his estate. As the executor of Raymond's will, Blanche presented a document to his sons stating that Raymond wished to divide his assets 3 ways, including her. The will, signed just a month before his death, added a layer of suspicion to the already mysterious circumstances. The aftermath of Raymond Reed's death in 1986 brought significant changes in Blanche Taylor's life. The very next year, the sexual harassment lawsuit she had filed against Robert J. Hutton and Kroger, which had been a source of considerable stress, finally reached a resolution. As the jury was being selected for the trial, the case was settled out of court. The terms of the settlement were kept confidential, yet it was hinted by one lawyer that Mrs. Taylor received a good sum of money from the agreement. Following the settlement, Blanche sought psychiatric help. Blanche's psychiatrist, Dr. Jesse N. McNeil, in an affidavit noted that the prolonged sexual harassment she endured at Kroger contributed significantly to her mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and a serious suicidal condition. The text of the lawsuit's complaint further revealed her emotional state, claiming that she felt, quote, completely antagonistic towards men and had not been able to maintain any meaningful social contacts with members of the opposite sex, unquote. However, her lawyer, Mitchell M. McIntyre, offered a different perspective on her condition. He suggested that the statements in the lawsuit might have been exaggerated. "She's not a man-hater," he stated, adding that her response to the harassment was normal and not indicative of any profound psychological change. Despite these claims and her reported aversion to men, Blanche continued her relationship with Reverend Dwight Moore. They remained together for years, although they never married. Reflecting on his own father's relationship with Blanche, Raymond Reed's son Steve acknowledged her polite demeanor but also noted her manipulative tendencies. "She was very good at manipulating people to get her way," he said. At the dawn of 1988, Blanche Taylor and Reverend Dwight Moore's relationship deepened. Marriage was on the horizon. Plans for a grand wedding in his church after Thanksgiving were set in motion. However, in a twist of fate just before the event, Moore fell severely ill, exhibiting symptoms of vomiting and weakness. The severity of his condition led to multiple hospitalizations and 2 surgeries on his intestines. Despite these challenges, Moore's health gradually improved. Finally, on April 19th, the couple exchanged vows in a modest ceremony, a stark contrast to their initial plans. Doris Pender, a witness and friend, fondly remembered the occasion. "She had on a real pretty dress. They were beaming. It seemed like there was electricity there." The newlyweds celebrated their union with a weekend trip to New Jersey. Upon their return, life seemed to resume its normal rhythm, with Moore busying himself around their white frame parsonage. But this semblance of tranquility was short-lived. After consuming a chicken sandwich Blanche brought him, Moore's health rapidly deteriorated. Former Burlington Police First Sergeant Dexter Lowe detailed the grim symptoms. Numbness and neuropathy in his hands, in his feet, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, shortness of breath, excruciating pain all over the body. The mysterious nature of Reverend Moore's illness baffled the medical team until a medical student suggested testing him for heavy metals. The results were astonishing. Moore's blood contained arsenic levels 100 times above normal, an unprecedented finding. In light of this alarming discovery, the hospital contacted the police, who began monitoring and restricting Moore's visitors, including Blanche. Remarkably, once these measures were implemented, Moore's condition began to stabilize. The focus shifted to uncovering how and why this near-fatal poisoning occurred. As the perplexing case of Reverend Dwight Moore's poisoning unfolded, authorities naturally turned to Blanche Taylor for answers. Despite the alarming discovery of arsenic in her husband's system, Blanche maintained her innocence. She offered an alternative explanation, suggesting to the investigators, as recounted by First Sergeant Dexter Lowe, that Dwight was struggling with depression and might have poisoned himself. However, Dwight, when interviewed by the police, firmly denied any attempt at self-harm and expressed bewilderment at the thought of someone wanting to harm him. It was during this interview that he mentioned Raymond Reed, prompting a new angle of investigation. His sister Nora Halbrook, reflecting on Reed's death, said, "We thought it was an accident, but the police saw the situation differently." Their suspicions gravitated toward Blanche, leading them to delve deeper into her past. In a significant move, authorities exhumed Raymond Reed's body for toxicology tests, seeking clues that might link the two cases. The results were startling. The examination of Mr. Reed's tissues revealed elevated levels of arsenic, not just a little more than normal, but in a concentration associated with fatalities, said former North Carolina Chief Medical Examiner John Butts. This revelation was compounded by the fact that Reverend Dwight Moore's arsenic level, as reported by the News and Record, was 30 times higher than normal. The investigation into the mysterious illness of Reverend Dwight Moore led authorities to revisit the past, specifically the unanticipated death of Blanche Taylor's first husband, James Napoleon Taylor. His demise, previously attributed to heart failure, now piqued the interest of investigators due to the recent arsenic poisoning cases connected to Blanche. Acting on this suspicion, former North Carolina Chief Medical Examiner John Butts recommended exhuming Taylor's body for an autopsy. The findings were shocking. Taylor's arsenic levels were found to be 60 times the normal rate. While the small, close-knit community of Burlington was rocked by these revelations, Blanche Moore, now Mrs. Moore, maintained her composure publicly. Despite the growing suspicion and media attention, she continued to visit her husband in the hospital until he ultimately ended their marriage, leaving her in tears. Dwight defended her and wouldn't believe it until the authorities gave him the evidence on Reed, his sister Nola Halbrook recounted. The unfolding investigation prompted the authorities to question the number of unusual deaths in Blanche's life. "We had a list at the time of 22 people that we obtained court orders to obtain their medical records," stated Burlington Police Sergeant Dexter Lowe. In a further twist, the bodies of Blanche's father, P.D. Kaiser Sr., and her mother-in-law, Isa Taylor, were also exhumed. Autopsies revealed high levels of arsenic in their systems as well, although, as Lowe noted, not in lethal amounts. These startling discoveries painted a grim picture, suggesting a pattern that extended far beyond a single incident. The authorities' deepening probe into Blanche Taylor's past was unearthing a trail of death and suspicion that seemed to follow her throughout the years. The saga surrounding Blanche Taylor reached a critical juncture on July 18, 1989, when she was arrested at her home and held without bond. She was charged in all three of those cases: Taylor, Reed, and Moore. 2 charges for murder and 1 for attempted murder. Blanche's attorney, Mitchell M. McIntyre, expressed his client's disbelief at the charges. "This is incredible to her," he stated. "She said it was a nightmare that seemed to be stalking her. How do they know to go to her first husband and then a friend and then her former husband? There seems to be some figure that's pointing out where to go." Despite Blanche and her lawyer's assertions of an unfathomable mistake, lead police investigator Lynch dismissed the idea of an unseen hand guiding the investigation, emphasizing that following the trail of Blanche's dead lovers and husbands was just common sense. While McIntyre refrained from allowing direct interviews with Blanche, he conveyed her stance to the public. She said she is not guilty. She wants the public to know that. In a dramatic twist before Blanche's trial commenced, her attorney presented a confession purportedly written by a man named Garvin Thomas. In this handwritten note, Thomas claimed responsibility for the poisonings, alleging he committed the crimes out of love for Blanche. However, this confession was soon discredited. The State Bureau of Investigations, after examining various samples of Blanche's handwriting, concluded that she had authored the note herself. In October 1990, the case against Blanche Taylor Moore for the murder of Raymond Reed proceeded to trial. The state's case was robust, backed up by a lineup of 54 prosecution witnesses, including the recovering Dwight Moore, who had barely survived severe arsenic poisoning. The verdict was swift and unequivocal. On November 14, 1990, the 57-year-old Blanche was found guilty of Raymond's murder. The Associated Press reported that she was subsequently sentenced to death. Following her conviction, authorities decided not to pursue the other charges against her, including the death of her first husband, Taylor, and the poisoning of Dwight. Despite the gravity of her sentence, Blanche's familial bonds remained strong. Her devoted daughters continued their weekly 15-minute visits, separated by a glass partition, a ritual sometimes joined by one of her 3 grandchildren. The family grappled with the bewildering turn of events. "Nobody wants the truth more than we do," Cynthia Taylor Chapman, Blanche's 30-year-old daughter, expressed. Vanessa Woods, Cynthia's 36-year-old sister, added, "Behind the headlines is a person who is not capable of doing this." The repercussions of the case extended beyond the courtroom. Dwight Moore was still battling the effects of arsenic poisoning, struggling to regain mobility in his hands and feet, and the white streaks growing on his fingernails stood as a grim reminder of his ordeal. The investigation continued to cast a long shadow over the community. Authorities considered exhuming bodies of others who had known Mrs. Moore. "I would say it's the most talked about crime this county has seen," Lieutenant Steve Lynch commented. The case became a topic of intense local interest in the Piedmont region of North Carolina, known for its tobacco fields, textile mills, and outlet stores. The community's reactions ranged from dark humor, evidenced by a Blanche Taylor Moore cookbook t-shirt with ant poison recipes, to frustration and annoyance with the ongoing attention. Weeks after Blanche's death sentence, Reverend Dwight Moore filed for divorce. He later remarried, moved to Virginia, and passed away in 2013 from natural causes. As of April 2023, Blanche turned 90, becoming North Carolina's oldest death row inmate and one of only 2 women in the state to be condemned. With North Carolina having not executed a prisoner since 2006, it is assumed that Moore will spend her remaining days in prison. Despite the overwhelming evidence and her conviction, she maintains her innocence. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.
If you like the show, please subscribe, review, and tell your friends. You can find us on social media at Kinda Murdery or email at kindamurdery@gmail.com.